Welcome back to Do You Ever Really Think About It? This is a podcast where we actually slow down and question the things everyone just accepts. I talk about conspiracy theories, politics, the Bible, apologetics, and sometimes I literally go out into the streets with a mic and ask people what they actually believe and why. A lot of people I talk to, especially teenagers and young adults, ask the same hard questions over and over. How do we know the Bible is true? If God is good, why is there so much evil in the world? And here's another one that comes up constantly. If God doesn't exist, where does morality come from? Because we all agree that things like murder, slavery, and betrayal are wrong. But why? Is morality just opinion, culture, survival instinct, or is it written on our hearts? Today we're tackling the question head on. Can morality exist without God? One of my followers asked it in a way that really exposes the problem, and we're breaking that down today. So if you ever really question what you believe and why you believe it, stay with me. Don't scroll, don't tune out, actually think about it. I'm Alexia, and this is Do You Ever Really Think About It? What if humans did not know the difference between right and wrong? What would happen? Well, we'd all probably be in chaos right now because we wouldn't know how or why lying, stealing, and murdering is bad. We wouldn't know right from wrong. We would be mindless and very stupid. This is why humans need a moral law. This is why humans need morality. Humans need a moral compass. Today we'll be looking into the question, can morality exist without Yahweh? Or as one of my followers on Instagram puts it, if moral values are nothing more than personal or cultural preferences, how do we account for the universal human intuition that some actions, like murder, slavery, or betrayal, are objectively wrong? And what framework, if any, can justify these intuitions without appealing to a transcendent moral source, end quote. Let's break down what my follower asked for the slower ones watching this, I included. The first question is, if moral values are nothing more than personal or cultural preferences, if right and wrong are just opinions or based on culture. Now the second part, how do we account for the universal intuition that actions like murder, slavery, or betrayal are objectively wrong? In other words, why do humans across cultures and history tend to agree that certain things are wrong no matter what? He's pointing out, my follower, that people usually treat these acts as wrong in an objective sense, not just I don't like it. Now the final question. Quote, and what framework, if any, can justify these judgments without appealing to a transcendent moral source? If you don't believe in a God or some higher moral authority, what system can actually explain or ground why these actions are truly wrong and not just socially inconvenient? This question is a heavily debated topic, and I'm not trying to only help Christians, fellow followers, answer this frequently asked question, but today I'm also trying to somewhat educate and help any agnostics or atheists out there watching this. We're gonna break down the true definition of morality, morals, yada yada. Basically, the question, can morality exist without Yahweh? And what I mean by Yahweh or Jehovah Jireh, I mean the God of the Bible, because that's his actual Hebrew name. We'll also be answering the question, where does morality come from? Let's start off with definitions. Harm.com tells us that morality is the distinction between right and wrong. It is a determination of what should and should not be done. And the New Oxford American Dictionary defines morality as principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong. And for Gen Alpha watching this, ChatGPT defines morality as morality means a system of beliefs or rules about right and wrong behavior. Basically how people ought to act. More simply, morality tells us this is right and this is wrong. It guides our choices about how we should treat others. So in short, morality is a standard we use to judge actions as good or bad, right and wrong. But what is the standard? Unfortunately, there isn't just one agreed upon standard. Everyone has different lenses they use to look at the world. Different views use different standards. I feel like because of that, different views, different standards, comes the quote, there is no absolute truth, there is only your truth. And because culture of the world say that, comes the mayhem, void in the heart, seeking for truth, the destruction of Christianity, and so many other things. One more example is depressed teenagers. Their families, parents having leftist theology, specifically like being in constant confusion, not being in reality. They say they being leftist, liberals, anyone who is not for basically Republican values, those who have leftist theology. I'm not trying to be political here, I'm just using that as an example. See that quote, it's not trying to make your views match morality, it's about tearing down doctrines that are morally wrong to you, to make them match your own internal conscience, moral compass, or whatever else is being called these days. Because there is no absolute truth, nothing moves forward. There is void. Young people in general, are searching for truth. I hope you guys get the point I'm trying to get across. I can go on and on about this and how it all tied together, the political world, the religious world, or all the realms, the agnostics and the atheist views, the economical world, and everything. But it would be so long of an episode. The episode would probably be so long, I could literally write a book on this question. So I'm going to do my best for you guys to answer this without wandering off too much into all the ethics and stuff. Here are the main standards, very briefly. 1, being a heavenly godly source giving us law. 2, being that we could all agree upon the fact that something is wrong because it's bad, not just because we don't like it. Those are basically all the standards. Looking at the second standard, how do you know what's bad? Where does the knowledge of knowing good and bad come from? In other words, where does morality come from? There are differing views like atheists, the Big Bang Theory, the evolution, saying that it was encrypted into our being. It came from nothing. Christians saying it was given to us by Yeshua, the God of the Bible, written on our hearts, the law of Moses, the 10 commandments. The first part of his question is a statement. If moral values are nothing more than personal or cultural preferences, that was his first statement, essentially saying that if right and wrong are just opinions or based on culture. His statement is assuming that, of course, the standards of morality came from your truth, your inner moral compass, or cultural preferences. And as we all know, cultural preferences change throughout time. It's not sustainable. It's not absolute truth. It's opinion. There are two key differences. Some truth is subjective and some truth is objective. Subjective changes throughout time or between each person. Objective does not change at all. It is absolute truth. For example, subjective truth could be like chocolate ice cream. Chocolate ice cream is better than vanilla. That's true for the person who believes it, but others can disagree and still be right. There is no objective truth that chocolate ice cream is better than all the other ones. It varies between the persons. An example for objective truth is humans need oxygen to survive. This is true regardless of what anyone believes. Disagreement does not disprove objective truth. People disagree about science, history, and math, but that doesn't mean there is no correct answer. I'm choosing his first statement just to say that morality can be both subjective and objective. It is subjective when it depends on personal opinions, cultural norms, or certain individual beliefs. What one person or society sees as acceptable might be wrong in another. Some cultures view eating certain foods or telling small white lies differently, showing that these moral judgments aren't universal. And at the same time, morality is objective in cases where actions like murder, stealing, or lying are universally recognized as wrong, because these actions can cause harm or violate fairness, independent of anyone's opinion. This shows that while some moral values vary, others are grounded in principles that apply to everyone. Let's read his question. If moral values are nothing more than personal or cultural preferences, how do we account for the universal human intuition that some actions like murder, slavery, and betrayal are objectively wrong? Meaning, if right and wrong are just opinions or based on culture, why do humans across cultures and history tend to agree that certain things are wrong no matter what? If you don't believe in God or some moral authority, what system can actually explain or ground why these actions are truly wrong and not just socially inconvenient? First off, as we already established, my follower is basing morality off of opinions and what culture thinks. This is inconsistent. Why? Because opinions and cultural norms change over time, like trends. For example, murdering used to be bad. It was ruled as a bad deed everywhere. But now somebody has hate speech or doesn't agree what the majority thinks, they are murdered. Treated differently, hated, like Charlie Kirk. So originally murder was bad, now it's okay if you just don't like them. I'm not trying to be political here, I'm just putting it how it is. As of why humans all over the world agree on what's bad is because, well, two things. I'll start off with the secular reasoning. Murder or slavery cause harm to others in a way that is universally recognizable. That's why so many philosophers argue that these are objectively wrong, because they violate basic human well-being, not just personal taste. So, quote, morality can have some universal standards even without appealing to a higher power, end quote. But then you just have to ask the question, but how do they recognize it's bad? Then secular people will follow up with, quote, they recognize it's bad because these actions can cause harm. They cause harm, suffering, or destroy trust, which humans naturally notice and respond to. Even without rules, people can see that killing, enslaving, or betraying someone makes life worse for others and society unstable. Basically, our brains and social instincts gives us a sense that these things are wrong, end quote. As I was studying this question, when you ask why or how and etc., they'll give you the same answer without actually answering it. So without further ado, quote, basically our brains and social instincts gives us a sense that these things are wrong. People inherently know that some things are right and some things are wrong, whether they believe in God or not. When we argue over right and wrong, we appeal to a higher law that we assume everyone knows, like no lying, stealing, killing, and so forth. We can see that when there is no law, people can do whatever they want and desire to do. Here's an example. Somalia after 1991, when the central government collapsed and there was no real law or enforcement. With no courts or police, warlords and militias took control. They looted homes and seized lands, kidnapped civilians for ransom, and used violence to settle disputes. Piracy grew along the coast because there was no consequences, and even basic things like trade or travel became dangerous. Ordinary people had no protection. Whoever had the most weapons made the rules. Sorry if I pronounced anything wrong. Another example is the French Revolution. During the Reign of Terror, when legal order broke down and authority shifted rapidly, people acted on fear, anger, and ideology. Public executions became common, neighbors turned on each other, and accusations alone could get someone killed. With weak or unstable law, chaos and brutality followed. Both examples showed that when law collapses, people often act on desire, fear, or power, not justice, and society quickly descends into disorder. People did what they wanted, whenever they wanted, and how they wanted to do it. So although the majority can agree on what is right and what is wrong, what's wrong still happens on desire, wanting, or it even being an evil passion, like serial killing. We all deep down inside have the moral law written on our hearts. The moral law, like no lying and stealing, is just common sense to us. Using evolution and Big Bang Theory really gives no examples or answers other than it was always there. Or and it just happened. If there is law, there must be a moral lawgiver, a higher authority. Everything originates from something, like Tesla's, paintings, the Constitution, a building. There must have been an architect that then used machines to help build the building. And the architect made the blueprint of how the foundation should be laid, how it should be done, and so forth. Now stay with me here. The architect gave the instructions, aka the law, for the buildings inside the walls, that foundation, aka the moral law on our hearts. Get what I'm trying to say? We have the moral law written on our hearts, in our hearts. Where it comes from and how it got there is the question though. Using evolution and the Big Bang Theory just say it's always been there. It's just happened. But that's not a valid argument. It's not a strong argument. It's quite literally a crappy one. It's blind faith. Another slight point of view is an atheist may object and claim that objective moral values don't actually exist, that morals are a social construct, and that nothing is actually good or evil. These are merely subjective human judgments and should not be taken seriously. There is no definitive proof that objective moral standards do not exist. Further, the atheist may also object that morality can exist on its own without God. But the problem here is that there is no clear reason why this would be so. Like I said, blind faith. If morality is mere instinct, then it is not objective. The person who denies the existence of objective moral laws leads to a very contradictory life, denying its reality yet living by its standards. Really? Evolutionary theories fail to provide a satisfactory explanation for moral law, as it cannot account for the binding nature of moral obligations, the concept of moral accountability, or the justification of moral truths. There simply is no rational ground that has ever been offered for real objective morality outside of a higher non-human being, a God, one who never changes, is sovereign over everything, who is reliable, who will and hasn't ever sinned. Because if we did have a sin God, we have a changing God. That God would be able to make mistakes, and at that point they ain't even God. They are fallen like us, humans, who are incapable of being perfect or enough. Before I continue, let's clarify ontology versus epistemology, whatever this word is. For anyone who says in the comments, I know right and wrong without God, ontology is basically asking what's actually real and what's not. For example, your phone, obviously real. Numbers, you can't touch them, but they still run the world. Ontology equals the foundation of your worldview. If your ontology is off, everything built on it is cooked. Epistemology is basically how do you know what you know. So ontology, what exists, epistemology, how do you know? I'm sorry if I'm saying anything wrong, I know I am. So I do have a question for the atheists, the agnostics, or anyone who believes in evolution and the Big Bang Theory. If you can have blind faith in evolution, the Big Bang Theory, where everything comes from nothing, why can't you have faith in the God of the Bible? I'm not finished, just wait. The Bible, doing your own research, not going to a church, since literally every single church is false, looking at history of how it aligns with the Bible, and how science really does align with the Bible. Call me crazy if you'd like. I can do an episode exposing how the millions of years Earth can be true. Because, hint, the tools scientists use don't actually work. Just do your own research, okay? I beg of you. If you can believe in the blind faith of evolution and the Big Bang Theory, why can't you believe in the God of the Bible? And the Bible, where you can actually have reasoning and foundations, points, and facts without assuming. And something to the critics I know will bring up, is something good because God commands it, or is God commanded because it's good? Goodness is not arbitrary, I believe I'm saying that right. And it's not external to God. Morality flows from God's unchanging nature. God doesn't invent goodness, he is good. Meaning, goodness isn't something God makes up. It isn't a rule above him either. Instead, goodness is grounded in who God is. Yeshua doesn't decide what's good the way humans make laws. Yeshua doesn't obey a moral standard outside of himself. Yahweh's nature is the standard. Period, point blank. In responding to my follower's second question, what framework, if any, can justify these intuitions without appealing to a transcendent moral source, that's the issue. You have to appeal to a transcendent moral source. Objective moral values and duties exist, according to a necessity of a moral lawgiver, God. The Bible affirms that humans inherently know right and wrong, implying a higher moral law that requires a lawgiver. Without God, there is no foundation for objective morality, and any attempt to separate the morality from God fails to explain moral obligations or accountability. Arguments that attempt to separate morality from God fail, as evolutionary theory cannot adequately explain the binding nature of moral law or the concept of moral accountability. Romans 2:14 through 15 explains that all humans have an inherent sense of right and wrong. For when Gentiles do not have the law, by nature do what the law requires. They are a law to themselves. Even though they do not have the law, they show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, where their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. The Ten Commandments are foundational to moral law, Exodus 21 through 17. Our decisions have consciences, even if we have not heard or read about them in the Bible. When we argue over right and wrong, we appeal to a high law we assume that everybody knows about. Like I said earlier, it's like common sense. It comes from the heart, as it is written on our hearts. It was given to us by Jehovah Jireh, the God of the Bible. He has many names, guys. So let's return to the original question. Can morality exist without God? The simple answer is you can't. If morality was only personal opinion or cultural preference, then it would change with time, power, and popularity, but moral truths don't behave like trends. Humans everywhere recognize moral duties, things that we ought to do and that we ought not to do, even when it costs us something. That moral awareness did not come from nowhere. It is not self-created, and it is not the product of evolution or social agreement. It is written on our hearts by God Himself. Conscience is not a social invention, it is evidence of moral law. Even those who deny God still appeal to justice, fairness, and human dignity. In doing so, they rely on the very moral law they claim has no source. Law requires a lawgiver. Moral law is no exception. Scripture explains this clearly. The work of the law is written on our hearts, and our conscience bears witness. This is why moral truth feels binding, not optional. So morality does not merely point to God. Morality comes from God. Remove God and you don't get a different morality. You get no morality at all. Only preference, power, and chaos. Thank y'all for listening. I'll see you guys next time on the Do You Ever Really Think About It podcast, where the deep, well-needed conversations are just beginning.